Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris.
And my name is James.
And we are the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
Yep, and here we are after the inaugural Miami Grand Prix weekend. And before we get started, personally, my first episode as a newly engaged man.
Yes.
Very excited. Very excited.
Congratulations to both Chris and Brittany.
Yes, thank you very much.
Brittany will be joining at some point on an episode because she is also a fan of F1.
And our resident Sergio Perez fan.
Yes.
Here.
Yeah.
So she keeps up with all of that. And she had some things. We watched the race together, unfortunately could not join us, but she has some things to bring up in the episode. So we'll be sure to get to all of that. But starting right away, just general thoughts on the weekend.
There was a lot of hype surrounding the weekend, which was really cool. Like F1 in America is becoming hugely popular, which is as Americans, us being from the United States, it's really cool to see. But I don't know. I was kind of let down by the race.
Yep.
I was very much let down.
Yeah, I was too. I mean, especially the racing itself too. I was a little let down by. It was a little bit of a procession, and it just didn't. With the exception of the safety car, there wasn't much happening. And I think had that safety car not happened,
it would have been worse.
It would have continued to go the way that it was going. The entire race. So it's good that we had a safety car, but it was, it was tough to watch, and we'll get on some other stuff about that, but specifically getting into the race. So we'll go right into our race takeaways. My first one is it looks like advantage Red Bull. They were 100% the quicker team compared to Ferrari. They were the quicker team this weekend. Their straight line speed is proving to be absolutely mega. And also with Ferrari, it looks like they're just having a problem, and a problem that has been plaguing this team for a while is Ferrari compared to the other teams like Mercedes and Red Bull go through their tires a little bit quicker. And that definitely seemed to be a problem today, just kind of going through tires a little bit quicker. So yeah, it's definitely advantage Red Bull. Red Bull have updated their car twice. Now, the thing we have to remember is Ferrari are still on their Barcelona testing spec, with the exception of updates, a small update to the floor and some updates to the engine configuration,
which they only brought in this weekend.
Yes.
And I know there are bigger updates to come with Ferrari for Spain. And that's really, really big that Red Bull have updated their car twice and have had, and they've been pretty successful and big upgrades. And Ferrari have not. They, like you said, they're still running their Barcelona test spec car. So I think once they put the updates on the car for Spain, it'll be a lot more even. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Right now, it's definitely advantage Red Bull. Which, depending on which side of the coin you flip, I mean, that's good for Red Bull because at the beginning of the season, it looked like their reliability issues were going to plague them. And, right after Bahrain, people were writing them off out of the championship. It looked like it was going to be easy Ferrari, but that's now proving to be, granted, there's still so much season left, but it's proving to be like, okay, they figured all that stuff out. They brought in the updates, and hopefully Ferrari can bring the updates to match for Spain.
Yeah. And so for those wondering sort of why they're targeting Spain. So for a couple reasons, they waited until their upgrades are ready. They were ready going into Imola. And so the reason why they didn't want to do it in Imola is because that was the first sprint weekend, and they would have only had one practice session before the cars were locked down in Parc Ferme, essentially meaning that they couldn't touch the setup of the car at all. Like that was going to be the race setup. So they would only have one 60-minute practice session to sort of test everything and make sure that everything was correlating, which is not advantageous at all. And then it is in the cost cap era. If they wanted to do it in Miami, they would have had to ship all of those extra parts over to Miami. Mm-hmm. So just in a cost cap era, it's much cheaper to get those from Italy to Spain than Italy to Florida. So that's sort of why they're targeting Spain, or like Spain, Monaco as sort of their time it's expected for Spain. So, so yeah, that's a big thing. And that's sort of why they're looking at that. But, yeah, and just kind of going back to the championships, Crofty, I think it was Crofty said it, after the sprint race in Imola, Charles's championship lead was 40 points, and now it's down to 19.
Yeah.
So, and the constructors championship is also down pretty small. So it's definitely going to be, or maybe that was the constructors championship. I can't remember which one he said, but the Red Bull is definitely starting to eat into that gap. A lot.
Although only one time in Formula One history has someone at one point in the season led the championship by 40 points and lost. And that was Fernando Alonso in 2012.
Yep. So that's something important. But, I mean, think back to the schedule in 2012. We had 16 races? We have 20. Like that. We have
23.
23. So, well, once 22 at the moment, 23 once they confirm a replacement for the Russian Grand Prix. But yeah, I mean, so it's definitely going to be interesting. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And this weekend, I was, with all the hype surrounding this weekend and being in Miami, being in the States, I just felt like it was overall a letdown.
Yeah.
And the race was, I mean, you had a couple scraps here and there. I know, starting off a huge collision between Lando Norris and Pierre Gasly, that brought out the safety car. And honestly, had that safety car not come out, the race would have been just horrifically boring. But I was really impressed. Well, I mean, there wasn't really probably a whole lot Lando could have done, but that car stayed out of the wall, never touched the wall.
Yeah.
Which was pretty nice to see, that there could have been a lot more damage, a lot more money spent.
Yeah.
Than what happened.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely unfortunate. And the way that I see that incident is 100% a racing incident.
Yeah.
It, like, Pierre Gasly was slow and, struggling with his tires, struggling with his car, rejoined the track, and Lando was coming up on the left-hand side so quickly that Lando definitely didn't have time to react. And I just don't think, literally. And I just don't think that Pierre had enough time to react to Lando coming up as fast as he did. So it's unfortunate. I mean, if there's any portion of, I don't know that I can quantify portion of blame. I maybe say that you could lay a little bit more on Pierre Gasly, but wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, I definitely think that was definitely a racing incident. It's unfortunate that it happened. And then the only other action that we saw, quite a few, like Fernando Alonso came together with Lewis at the start, and again with Lance Stroll later, and then another big collision and I felt so bad that this happened. I think this was more so a racing incident as well, between the two German compatriots of Sebastian Vettel and Mick Schumacher, which really hurt to see because they're such good friends off the racetrack. So that hurt to see.
Yeah, it reminded me of the incident prior to Alonso and Gasly getting together, which resulted in a 5-second penalty for Alonso. Alonso didn't have the corner. Gasly came in, turned into it, and made contact with Gasly. And Alonso, I think rightly so, got a 5-second penalty for that. But I think Mick was much more well alongside Sebastian, and they just came together and contact. So I think that was also a little bit more of a racing incident. But yeah, I think Mick might be getting a little bit on the naughty list of Sebastian Vettel a little bit for that. I think they're close enough in their relationship that I think they'll be able to talk it through and be, good good adults about it. But yeah, that was tough to watch just from a fan of the wholesome connection that those two share. That was tough to watch.
Yeah.
Another one of my big takeaways is Bottas is absolutely 100% the driver that Alfa Romeo needs. And he had another stunning performance with the exception of went into, oh gosh, was it third? No, I can't remember what corner it is. Went in too deep, went wide, tagged the wall just a little bit, just enough to allow both of the Mercedes of Russell and Hamilton to go through. So that was definitely a mistake, and I think it's tough to rate him too highly on this weekend because he also had a crash in practice. But overall, he was running a very comfortable fifth, keeping for a majority of the race, keeping both of the Mercedes behind him up until he had that moment. He was keeping both of the Mercedes behind him. He was doing really well, running in a solid P5. And he had overall just a great weekend. He, started fifth, was running fifth, ended up seventh, but that was just a slight mistake more than anything because Hamilton and Russell were right on his gearbox. So it has to be said. And on the flip side of that coin, Joe didn't finish, but that was a mechanical failure. And I am reserving any criticism on Joe from this weekend just because it was just unlucky.
Yeah. The car just gave out.
Yeah. And we know that it's a quick car, but it's hard to handle. And Valtteri is incredibly quick and talented, especially over one lap. So, and it's always going to be a long time for Joe to kind of catch up to Bottas. I don't even know if we'll see it by the end of the season.
Yeah.
And this is not a knock to Joe. It's just Bottas is quick. Yeah. So I more than anything, I just feel really bad for Guan Yu Zhou.
Yeah. And with Valtteri, it was a very, very impressive weekend. And another thing I'm very happy to see, from all the media that either Alfa Romeo or F1 or Valtteri have put out over, especially this weekend, but over the past couple weeks, race weekends, he just seems so much more happier at Alfa Romeo. He's got a multi-year contract that he doesn't have to worry about. He just seems like the weight of the world is off his shoulders, and his performance has definitely reflected that.
Yeah, let's take a short view back to the past. Back to, I can't remember what race it is. Was it France 2021 when he did a one stopper and got buried by the Red Bulls, and the Red Bulls did a two stopper and were just so much quicker than the Mercedes. And he came over the radio and said, why would nobody listen to me? Or why did nobody listen to me when I said that this was going to be a two stopper? Because it ended up being a two stopper. So that was one thing. And I think now at Alfa Romeo, not only, like you said, he has a multi-year contract, so the pressure's off, but he has a team that listens to him and is taking his feedback. And I think in a way that Mercedes never did, values him. I don't think values him more than Mercedes, just values him in a different way, because at Mercedes, he was always Lewis's number two. And that's all Mercedes valued him for. Like they always said at the end of every season, and when they denied criticism of Valtteri Bottas, they would say, like, he's exactly the person that we need. He's reliable. He's there. And it's just not the way that I think Valtteri wanted to be seen, and didn't want his status on the team to be that way. So I think from a team status perspective, this is also 100% the environment that he needs. And he is proving to be the driver that Alfa Romeo signed up for in a very positive way.
Yeah, so. For sure. Yeah. So those are really my big takeaways for this weekend.
I have a couple more. Another one is, now that we're five races into the season, the cars, I think, are really, I think I've come to the conclusion that the cars are really good at following, but organic non-DRS assisted overtaking is still a challenge and is still a struggle facing Formula One. I think that's a trend that we're noticing. I think I noticed it a lot at Australia and Imola because those are two tracks that it is harder to overtake.
And this one seems like Miami seems like a track that it's more difficult to overtake.
Yes. I will say, had the cars not been able to follow the way that they were able to, I think it would have been even worse than it already was. So that's a plus. But it's still, they still have to solve get rid of some of those overtaking gremlins. Yeah. But we do know that, the FIA released their intended targets for the 2026 new regulations. They release, the technical regulations, like, what their goals are. And one of the goals is to reduce or contain, size and mass of the car. So, they are thinking ahead, allowing themselves a lot of opportunities to sort of understand that problem and try and combat it a little bit more. So,
yeah. And I think we saw at least sorry, brain stopped working for a sec. I don't think it's too terribly big of an issue. Because we did see a lot of great racing in Bahrain. When we get to tracks like Spain or Austria, I'm trying to think of some others where it's like produces some really good racing traditionally. I think it'll be great racings. But I know Miami, it looks like a track that it's not very easy to overtake.
Yeah. So that's the biggest thing. I have two more. One, McLaren were definitely not on the pace that they were in Australia and Imola. And I think, and we'll talk about McLaren in a little bit as well, but I think,
because this is my hot take.
Their performance is not good or bad. It's just track specific. That's all it was. And I just don't think that Miami was a track that suited them. I think, Lando, got bad luck because of the race, but he was in that situation because he, after he pitted, he got stuck behind, it was, I have it in here somewhere. It was him and both of the Hasses were stuck behind the Aston Martins who had not pitted for like 10 laps. They were just stuck there and could not get by. So that was another thing that I think had the McLarens had a little bit more pace in hand, I don't think Lando would have ended up in the situation that he ended up in, fighting with AlphaTauris over non-points finishing places. So, and that's really unfortunate because they're a great team. I love that team. Daniel and Lando, I love them. They're fantastic, and I want to see them do better. And it's hard to watch when they're not. And then my last race takeaway is it is very clear to see that F1 is continuing to grow in the United States, and I think has officially landed in the America sports world. I think I don't think it will ever have the status of like NASCAR and IndyCar because of how rooted in American history, especially NASCAR is. But as a new phenomenon, I think F1 has officially entered the conversation in the United States.
I mean, the tickets that we bought for the general admission tickets that we got for Austin were completely sold out by end of January.
Yep.
And the race is until October. So it's like 9 months later.
Yep. We have some other, I have some other hot takes about me and Brittany as well have some hot takes about specifically Miami and the weekend later, but those are all of our race takeaways. I think general reactions, just to kind of sum everything up. Good weekend, not one of F1's best. And I am looking forward to getting into the European season.
Last takeaway. And I know we'll mention it later. Those football helmets looked ridiculous on the podium. Oh my God. So bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll move on from that.
Yeah.
On to our next segment. We are going to take a look at this week's top 10. And top 10 overall from the week. It doesn't have to be any specific driver or specific team. Anything goes. There are no rules. So with that being said, let's get into our weekly top 10 from the Miami race weekend. I'll go ahead and start off in 10th place. In 10th place, we have all of the pit crews because, and Chris, you brought up a brilliant point. It was hot. It was humid. It's Miami in the spring. It's gross. And the tires are a lot heavier. It was tough work in the pits. So 10th place goes to the pit crews.
Yeah. The atmosphere reminded me a lot of Singapore, and it's just very hot and very humid. And we also have to account that those tires are like up 10, 15 kilos heavier than the tires of last year because the rims are bigger. So yeah, they definitely got their workouts in, and we saw a couple slow stops, I think, because of that. But I think all in all, they did really good. And I just think in general, the pit crews, the mechanics, the engineers, and everything definitely deserve a shout out, because everything that goes on behind the scenes is really, really hard. It's stressful. And when you get into a weekend like Miami or Singapore, where it's just hot and humid, it's not, I can't imagine that's the most fun thing to do ever. Yeah. So yeah, big shout out to the pit crews this weekend for doing that. And I will say, having, I've never lived in Florida, but having, for the past couple of years lived in the South, it's, you don't really get 4 seasons. You get a dry season and a monsoon season. And they were talking about the weather today and how, like, before the race, and how it was just like rain was just popping up out of nowhere. And that's just kind of the way it is in the South. You just get random thunderstorms that roll through, and, it'll rain for 10 minutes and then it'll be completely dry 10 minutes later. So
yeah,
big shout out to the pit crews. Moving on to number 9, we have the Scuderia Ferrari. The reason why we have them so low, they got second and third. It was a double podium. All in all, a great result. But the reason why we have them so low is they were fully outpaced by the Red Bulls this weekend. And I think that, if these upgrades don't come in Spain, or if the upgrades do come in Spain and they don't correlate the way that they are expecting it to, they're really going to start to lose their grip on the championship. And I think that they already are. And going back to what we said earlier, is they definitely passed the baton off to Red Bull, and it's now advantage Red Bull. And I think it's important to acknowledge the success of Ferrari this weekend, given that they were outpaced by the Red Bull, but they were outpaced by the Red Bulls.
Yeah. Especially Carlos having the woes of the past 2 races.
Yeah.
To now finishing on the podium. It wasn't a great weekend for them. It was still a pretty good weekend. So that's why we wanted to put them in the top 10, but we did put them down there pretty far down at 9.
And especially when you consider that they locked out the front row in qualifying.
Yes. Yeah.
So
up next in 8th place, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Martin Brundle, for his glorious pit grid walk today. It was very comical. Props to him though. There are a ton of people down there. He was making it, pushing and shoving his way through. So props to him for that. But it was very entertaining. It was very entertaining.
Yeah, it was incredibly entertaining. And Martin Brundle is not only is he incredibly experienced in the job that he does, but he's very good at it. His insights, I think, are just considering how he has F1 experience. He has, a lot of experience. He has experience racing some of the greats like Ayrton Senna and Nigel Mansell and everything, and Alain Prost, and he has experience doing that. So I think, given all of his experience, I love his takes. He's an incredible commentator. We're lucky to have him on the broadcast. But if you don't know what we're talking about when it comes to the grid walks, you need to check it out, because they're great. It's really good, not only just because they get really good access to the grid and to interview personnel, but it's just good entertainment. It's good TV. But yeah, I think that also brings up a question of, does F1 need to have tighter regulations on the number of people and who has access to the grid, because there are so many celebrities there.
Yeah, just way too many.
But that is a conversation for another time.
Yes.
In 7th, kind of in the same vein that we were talking about, is just the atmosphere of the Grand Prix. I think when we have this conversation about the atmosphere of the Grand Prix, I want to separate the racing and the facilities from the atmosphere surrounding the event, because the atmosphere was really good. It reminded me of like an American version of Monaco. And I think that is something that has always made Monaco special to me, is the atmosphere and the jubilee around the event.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's pretty much the only reason why they keep Monaco on. If it wasn't special, then they would have gotten rid of it a long time ago, because the racing's so boring. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
So the atmosphere reminded me a lot of an American version of Monaco, and just also in general, I think it's nice because Formula One is so European centric, and prior to Circuit of the Americas, there was no F1 racing after 2006 Indianapolis or 2007 Indianapolis. And so there was no F1 racing in America for a while. We've only had, a couple races in America, generally every season, but it's only ever been one or two, So compared to the European season, it's always been a European centric. So it's nice. And especially considering people love to criticize American Formula One teams a little bit, or not teams, but fans. It's nice that the US is getting a little bit of recognition around the way that they put on events. Because I think it is bigger, it is better. There's a lot of celebration around those events. I mean, a Formula One race in America is, because it is so rare and so special, it's really done up like the Super Bowl or the World Series or the Daytona 500, those things like that. So it's really cool to see, and personnel in Formula One to give a little bit of recognition to.
Yeah. Up next in 6th place, we have Mr. Alex Albon.
Yes.
He drove a great weekend, finished in the points. Hats off to you.
Yep. Alex Albon started 18th and finished 10th. Yeah.
Ran a fantastic race, and, gaining 8 points or 8 positions throughout the race, finishing in the points.
And especially in that Williams.
Yes.
So yeah, really good.
And Alex is proving, much like Valtteri in Alfa Romeo, Alex is proving to be the driver that can replace George.
Yep.
And proving that he is the driver that they need him to be.
Yep.
And is definitely filling the shoes that George Russell left. So
yes. And I think at the beginning of the season, there was a lot of speculation as to whether or not George was up to the task of filling the shoes of George Russell. And I think, at least at the moment, he is, and he's on form. He's doing a great job. He has this uncanny ability to make really unorthodox strategies work for him really well right now. I mean, look back to Australia, pitted on literally the last lap, made hard tires work for him for the entire race, pitted on the last lap, came home in 10th, and not a distant 10th either. Like, he was close to 9th.
Yeah, he was very close to 9th.
So, and before his pit stop was only running about 4 seconds behind Daniel Ricciardo. This is looking back at Australia. So yeah. And it's unfortunate that it got like no recognition from the broadcast team. Like nobody was talking about Albon. And at the end of the race, I was like, hold up, wait a minute. Albon's in 10th. Where did that come from?
Yeah, well, he's who I voted for driver of the day.
Which should have
been him.
There are many.
I understand why it was Max, because like he won, but like if Mick hadn't wrecked, maybe he would have gotten it.
Yeah. So moving on to number 5.
In 5th place, Mr. Valtteri Bottas. Mm-hmm. Very similar to Alex Albon. He is proving to be every bit of the driver that Alfa Romeo needs. Yes, he did. And we talked a little bit about this in the takeaway, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But up until his little visitation with the wall, his little encounter, his brush with the wall, all those fancy words, he was running up in 5th place, started 5th as well. And especially from where he had some mechanical issues in practice, but really, really had a great weekend. And even with that one little mistake that let the Mercedes by, for 95% of the race, he kept the Mercedes behind him, which is very satisfying to see.
Yeah, for sure. And in a way, he's turning a little bit into Mr. Reliable for them. Mm-hmm. Just one last stat on Valtteri Bottas is granted, it's only 5 races, but he has out-qualified Mr. Hamilton 3-2 this season in a car that is not as quick as Mercedes.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the 4th or 5th fastest car. And so it's not as quick as Mercedes, and he's out-qualified Lewis Hamilton 3-2, his former teammate.
Makes you think that maybe he could have won a championship had he not been so obviously set aside to Lewis.
Yep.
Had Mercedes just like let him race, maybe he could have won a championship.
And I think too, his status at Mercedes, not only was he just kind of the perennial number 2, I don't think it allowed him to grow into the Grand Prix driver that Williams had in 2016. And didn't allow him to grow and is now starting to grow into the Grand Prix driver that came into Mercedes with so much promise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think he definitely deserves big props.
Yep. In 4th place, Mr. Esteban Alkan,
who I think should have been driver of the day.
Yes. If not Alex, it should have been him.
Didn't put in a quali time because he couldn't get out in time.
So started last.
Aside from the 2 Aston Martins that started in the pit lane, started last, finished 8th.
Mm-hmm. Really, really, really great race from him.
Strong performance from him. And
gosh,
he made the strategy work. He did what he needed to do in the stints where he wasn't doing any overtaking. He just kind of put in the stints that he needed to. It was another, like Alex Albon, it was another very quiet performance, but it definitely needs recognition because it's great.
It was very impressive. I was also surprised that the broadcast team didn't really say much about that because of how impressive, in a car that is proven to be not that great, was able to put in a fantastic drive this weekend.
Yeah. For sure.
Yep.
I agree. All right. Moving on to 3rd place.
Very excited about this one.
We have to mention Jamie Chadwick.
Yes. 3rd place is Jamie Chadwick.
3rd place is Jamie Chadwick because, well, first, before I get into Jamie Chadwick, if nobody knows who we're talking about, you are missing out on so much action on Grand Prix weekend. She is the 2-time defending champ of the W Series. The W Series kicked off their season with a doubleheader in Miami, one on Saturday, one today, this morning before the Grand Prix, and she won both. She swept the weekend, took away maximum points, I believe, got fastest lap in each. And especially in the second race, put up some really good defense from like Alice Powell, Emma Kimalainen, Neria Marti. Like, she was just on it the entire weekend. She did really, really well. Got a little bit unlucky with the late red flag in qualifying. But yeah, she nailed it. And she definitely deserves some props for sweeping the Miami Grand Prix weekend for the W Series.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Just dominant driver. Oh gosh, I just so hope that we get to see her in F1, because how awesome would it be to have a female F1 driver?
Yeah, it's definitely needed. And at the beginning of the season, when she announced that she was coming back to the W Series to race with Jenner Racing, it was met with a lot of criticism, I think, because like she's someone that everybody sort of expected to get into Formula 3. And especially considering she's a part of the Williams development team driver academy, she's clearly incredibly talented. It's unfortunate that she doesn't have the backing needed, because drivers have to invest, upwards of $1 million or over $1 million into being in Formula 3 and Formula 2. So it's unfortunate that she didn't. I don't know the specifics, but just didn't seem like she had the backing to get into Formula 3. But it's a real shame that she didn't. But she's come back to the W Series this season and is already putting her championship defense off to an amazing start. And she definitely deserves every bit of the praise this weekend.
Yeah. All right. In second place, we have Mercedes, who started off, especially the race started off, not great.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis, I think he started
he started sixth.
But George Russell didn't make it to Q2, or didn't make it to Q3.
Ended up 12th.
And ended up qualifying 12th, and they both finished 5th and 6th. Yeah. So really, really, really great job for Mercedes, who have proven that they do not have a great car but when it comes on race day, they're putting in some good performances most of the races so far. And really good job.
Yeah, their FP3 results were really, really strange, considering George was second in first practice and led the way in second practice. And second practice is a really big indicator, because that's when they're doing qualifying runs, because it's the only practice session that is at the same time of qualifying. Mm-hmm. So you can really get like good, accurate data on how to set your car up for qualifying. And he was fastest. And so I think too, we do also know that, they brought in a relatively big upgrade package. They had upgrades to the front wing, the beam wing, the diffuser, the floor, like a lot of big upgrades. And they seem to have worked a little bit. I think they're still having trouble. We saw this in 2021. So this may be a little bit just kind of in the DNA of their car. Just not really able to get their tires or keep their tires in a good operating window. And like, it took a long time for Lewis to get the hards to Lewis and George to get the hard tires to come to them. Mm-hmm. But when it did, they were quick. And George ended up overtaking Hamilton by virtue of the virtual safety car and safety car, because he pitted and Lewis didn't. So yeah, Mercedes definitely improvement. And I think just given the performances of George over the past couple of weeks, and then just the collective performance this week, I think Mercedes is well on their way to maybe not necessarily 100% correcting the problems with their car, but definitely understanding it and paving a path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in first place, who also happened to win the race, Max Verstappen. Mm-hmm. Drove a great race, managed the tires very, very well, where we saw Charles and Carlos struggling with the tires, managed to get them in a good operating window, and was really able to push for pretty well into that first stint. Great race for Max, another great win. And every race that he's finished, he's won. So
Yep. Continues his 100% win streak of races that he finished. I think too, the other thing is, he's definitely taking advantage of the fact that Red Bull has the fastest car. I think he's not been doing really well in qualifying, which is unfortunate. And I didn't see his lap, so I don't know why he backed out at the last second. And so he stayed third, but
he missed the corner.
He started third, jumped sights on the start, and within, 10 laps, he was past Charles, and he was in complete control of the race. And even when him and Charles in the latter stages of the race were going back and forth with fastest laps, he always had a response to Charles. Charles would set the fastest lap, and then he would go and do it. And so he always had a response. And I think that's just, just all in all, a very mature drive for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, couldn't put it better myself. All right. That's our weekly top 10. On to our next topic of discussion, our biggest winners and biggest losers of the weekend. We'll make these a little bit quick, but we'll start off with our biggest losers of the weekend. And we both have some very similar ones, but I'll name one right off the bat, Haas, especially after the race.
Yeah.
Not great.
Silly mistakes from both Mick and Kevin throughout the race. Just had really scrappy races. And it's unfortunate because especially the one with Mick, like he was on track to get his first points, and it just hasn't, it just didn't line up. Just a silly mistake and collision with Sebastian Vettel. And same thing with Kevin Magnussen. I think, just had some silly mistakes, got caught up in some things, and it was just unfortunate. And especially considering with the hype surrounding Haas coming into the weekend, on home soil for the team, it was tough to watch. And I'm starting to worry that car is not quite, that there are some other teams that are starting to eclipse them in terms of pace. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to track their progress throughout the season. But yeah, definitely have to throw them in the biggest losers category.
Yeah. Another obvious one that I want to throw in is Zhou Guanyu, unfortunately retired from the race. Another one, Sergio Perez. Now, people are going to be like, well, he finished fourth. Why are you putting him in the biggest losers? On fresher tires, especially after the safety car, fresher tires, was not able to overtake Carlos Sainz. Almost did, but wasn't able to make it stick. Carlos was able to defend very well. And it's just unfortunate because Red Bull clearly has the better car. Mm-hmm. And on fresher tires with a better car was not able to overtake Carlos. So was not able to capitalize on that weekend. So
yeah, Carlos definitely came out and won that battle of the number twos today. And it's unfortunate, but yeah, I mean, and just in a car that we know is faster than the Ferraris, it just couldn't quite get around Sainz. Now Sainz is incredibly quick, still not quite up to where Charles has been. But Sainz is quick. But in a car like the Red Bull, it was just, and especially on fresher tires after the safety car, couldn't quite get it done. So I think that definitely hurts him a little bit. Not nearly as much as I think some non-Red Bull fans want it to, because he still finished fourth. He qualified fourth, finished fourth. Very good, reliable drive, but just in a, I would have loved him to see, him challenge Sainz a little bit more and make that overtake stick, because I think he has the car and the abilities to do it. For me, my one that I'll throw in is Aston Martin. Yeah. They started off, it was just dumb luck that they had some fuel temperature issues at the beginning. They couldn't get their fuel up to temperature. So, just for weight requirements and everything, and precautionary stuff, they wanted to, they didn't want to send them out onto the grid. So they started, they started from the pit lane, and, and they started on the hard tires, which was not the optimum start tire. And it took a long time for the hards for everybody to kind of come to them. So they had a really rough strategy that didn't make it work, and just overall like scrappy races from both of them. Both of them finished outside of the points, with Stroll in 12th and Sebastian Vettel DNFing and ending up classified 17th. So definitely a weekend, especially coming off of the back of Imola where they scored double points. That was a tough blow for them, but I think also is a little bit more accurate to the car that they have.
Yeah.
Other ones that I have for the same reason as Gasly and Norris, just bad luck, wrong place, wrong time, got stuck behind some cars that couldn't get out of their way. Gasly, this was one of the rougher races that I've seen Gasly, with, some of the mistakes that he made. So definitely not the cleanest race from him. I think the AlphaTauri is not as quick as it was last year, which is unfortunate because Gasly deserves to be up in the points. He's good enough to be in a points contending position every race. But yeah, just couldn't quite make it stick. And then eventually Lando Norris kind of got caught up in that situation. So,
yeah.
And I think too, along with Lando Norris, McLaren in general, with both of them finishing outside the points, it's another tough weekend for them.
Yep. All right. Shall we go on to our biggest winners of the week?
Yep. Super quick because we've already kind of mentioned all of them, but it's definitely important that and when we pick biggest winners, it's really the people. It's not always just going to be the top constructor or the top driver or whatever. It's just people that had exceptional performances. Yeah. So our first one is just Red Bull. Simply just because they have now, I think they have the edge over Ferrari.
Yeah. Another one, Esteban Alkan. We've already mentioned him. He drove a great race, starting 18th
starting 20th.
20th. Yeah. Started last, and finishing 8th. It's a really great race from him. And Mercedes, again, capitalizing where they need to capitalize. I think finishing where they finished was the best that they could have done. And they made strategy work for them, which they've always been really good at strategy. So yeah, great race for Mercedes.
One really quick note on Mercedes. Our last biggest winner, Alex Albon, another point for him. We've already kind of talked about him. So real quick, one last point on Mercedes before we move on is, we saw that Lewis Hamilton didn't pit under the VSC and the safety car to prioritize the position for George. And I think Hamilton was a little upset by that decision, the fact that he didn't also get to pit. And so I'm starting to wonder if this is signs of Mercedes prioritizing George because he's higher in the championship. I will say, I don't think that there will ever be a solid, hey, we need to prioritize this person over this person until like after the summer break. But I'm, it's starting to see like, when push comes to shove, they're not always going to support Hamilton when it comes to getting the best results for the team. So it was just something that I noticed, and I don't want to read too much into, considering it's only race 5, but definitely something to look at, when they prioritize George's race.
Yeah. Maybe I'm wondering if little tinfoil hat moment, I'm wondering if Hamilton has made some sort of indication to them that maybe this might be he might be on his way out of Formula One. Maybe that's why they're prioritizing George. I don't know. There hasn't been any indication of Lewis leaving, but who knows?
I think if he leaves, it's going to be out of pure frustration, not because he doesn't want to, because he said, at least like in the pressers leading up to the Miami Grand Prix, considering how soundly beaten he was by George and Imola, he said that, I'm not retiring. Like, this is like, I'm still in this, like, there's no conversation about me retiring. He's still fighting. He's still working really hard. So I think if he does end up leaving, it's going to be just out of frustration, not because he doesn't want to be there. And he definitely still wants to. So, but again, something definitely to keep track of throughout the season.
Yep. Now, last thing we'll mention, and we kind of talked about potentially making this a thing last week, and I just decided. I want to talk about our meme of the week, and we I I don't know if I'm gonna be able to talk about this without laughing. And this is kind of a dig at the FIA. Before we get into our hot takes, I want to talk about this before we get into our hot takes, because we are starting to run out of time. But have to talk about Sebastian Vettel wearing his underwear outside of his race suit as kind of a dig at the FIA. Seeing all the pictures, it was hilarious and totally a Sebastian Vettel move.
Yeah, it was funny, and calling attention to the FIA, like why the FIA is so hyperfixated on the whole underwear jewelry thing. I think weird. It's a little weird. Like, it's important. Like I said earlier, it's important, but there are more important things, And so I think that drew attention to it in a really comical, just very Sebastian Vettel way. And I think there isn't, I would be shocked to find anybody that didn't appreciate that moment.
Oh,
it was pretty funny.
It was pretty funny. So now to our final segment. We've got our hot takes of the week. We've got hot takes from both Chris and myself, as well as from Brittany, Chris's fiance. So Chris, why don't you start off with your hot takes? I'll say my hot take, and then we can end with Brittany's hot takes.
Yes. So my hot takes, my first one is, with all of the hype, F1 and the surrounding this weekend, the F1 and the FIA misses the mark on this race. The race was a procession prior to the safety car, and the only reason why it wasn't after is because just lots of bumping and banging around, as we in America say, rubbin's racing. It was a procession prior to the safety car. The tickets were entirely too expensive, given that the facilities were not up to the quality initially promised. Things like the fake marina it
looked stupid.
It looked so bad. It looked so tacky. Just in general, like, they were promising all of these gondolas and gazebos in this fake beach area, and it looked like just like deck chairs around fire pits. Like, it just kind of it misses the mark a lot in a lot of ways. Granted, we weren't there. So if anybody was there and is listening, we would love to hear about your experience. But it just, for me, from a TV perspective, from an American fan perspective, I think this one misses the mark a little bit.
Yep.
My other one is kind of in similar vein of what we were just talking about, with some additional things. I'm beginning to question the new leadership of the FIA ever so slightly. The business with the jewelry and underwear is silly. And my biggest thing was the refusal to place Tech Pro barriers on the concrete barrier where Esteban Ocon and Carlos Sainz had their crashes in practice was a dangerous oversight. And it is concerning to me that they did not take driver account into that decision. So if y'all don't know what I'm talking about, both Esteban Ocon and Carlos Sainz had crashes on concrete barriers before the race. Esteban Ocon had a bruised knee. Carlos Sainz had a strain in his neck and contusions to his hips. And it was because they ran into a concrete barrier that both of them have asked for Tech Pro to be placed there. Several drivers had backed them up on that decision in support of them. And the FIA did nothing. Yeah. Which is really unfortunate and is very dangerous, because had that happened at some place like Saudi Arabia, that could have been way worse. I mean, Gosh. I mean, we saw that with Mick Schumacher. So in Saudi Arabia. So I think that was an incredibly dangerous oversight. And I think the FIA needs to reevaluate that. And that should not happen. And so I'm beginning to question the leadership of the FIA.
Yeah, the whole thing about the jewelry and the underwear, I think, is just ridiculously silly. And we've talked about it in previous episodes, so I don't want to talk about it too much, but it seems very targeted and silly. It's just silly. If anyone from the FIA is hearing this, please, for the love of God, stop it. It's so dumb. There are bigger things to worry about, bigger fish to fry, than jewelry and underwear. it's kind of weird that they're focusing on underwear. It's really weird. But yeah, it's
and through that, it kind of seems like they're focusing on Lewis Hamilton in all the wrong ways, which is just not
that's
cool.
who I was kind of referencing with it seeming like it was targeted.
Yeah.
Which is not cool.
Yeah, it's not.
My hot take, before we go into Brittany's hot takes, my single hot take, there's a lot of hype around McLaren. Lando Norris claiming that, yes, we are the third fastest team on the grid. No, I do not think McLaren's the third fastest team on the grid. I think that still holds to Mercedes. I think it's still Mercedes, third fastest team on the grid. McLaren, you are not the third fastest team on the grid. They have shown a lot of improvement from where they were at Bahrain. But I don't think they're the third fastest team on the grid.
Yeah, the improvement that they've gone under needs to be talked about, and it cannot be understated.
Mm-hmm.
But
absolutely.
And I think, again, had we been having this conversation in Australia, I think it would have been very different. But I think, after Miami, I think, and with all of the upgrades that Mercedes have, I think, yeah, definitely can throw the third fastest team over to Mercedes.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, Brittany's hot takes. They're really good. I love them.
They're great. I appreciate her hot takes, because she is a lot newer to the F1 fandom than we are. We've been lifelong fans.
Yes.
So hers are a lot more thinking outside of the box, and I love it. I think you all are going to love it too.
She's kind of in that generation of F1 fans that kind of came in under the pandemic because of Drive to Survive. And when we were really, when we really came into our own as like really, really big Formula One fans, I was away living out, like we were living apart. I was in grad school in South Carolina and we were not together. So the pandemic, I think, brought a little bit of that into this. But, so she's definitely a newer fan, but, she's definitely, catching on, learning a lot. And she has some really great insights. So just as a personal note, I can't wait until she joins us. But her hot takes are kind of along what my first one was. She said that she can think of at least 7 different cities to host a Grand Prix instead of Miami.
Yep.
And we were just kind of having a conversation about it. And a lot of the cities that we were thinking about have already held Grand Prix, like Dallas. I know they Formula One has always kind of wanted for as long as I can remember, wanted to get into New York City. We also threw out places like Chicago, Denver.
Denver would be cool. I didn't even think of
Seattle, LA, San Francisco. Some big cities like that. I threw out Atlanta mainly just because I'm a big Braves fan, but I think Atlanta is a fantastic city.
Oh my gosh, racing in Seattle would be beautiful because you got like just the city skyline, the way the city's laid out. Beautiful city.
Or Miami through the actual streets, like a Baku or like a Baku or Monaco,
and maybe closer to the beach too.
Style track. And I think too, with the Hard Rock Stadium being where it is, it was not in South Beach. It was not in downtown Miami. It was in Miami Gardens, which is a very overwhelmingly minority neighborhood. It is much less funding and it's a poor neighborhood.
Yeah, which is why there was a lot of criticism from that area. Very justified.
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot of criticism and I am sort of along the side of those people because the FIA and Formula One, they offered $5 million to the community in compensation, which is just kind of like, here's $5 million, shut up and let us race kind of thing. And I think the idea of having it around Hard Rock Stadium is cool. And they did a lot of promo with the Miami Dolphins and everything. That was really great. But I just don't think enough consideration was taken into the community that affected. And the fact that they had to rip up a ton of parking lots that were used for football to create this permanent track. It's a street course, but it's a permanent track now.
Yeah, and except for the back straight is a public street, but like,
I think it's really unfortunate, and I think it would have been way cooler had they done it in like downtown Miami, like they do for Baku, like they do for Monaco. So yeah, it in a lot of ways it misses the mark again.
Yeah, so and not to knock Miami, but they're just like better cities with better facilities that they could have raced in. So I agree with that.
Another one for her is George Russell is smart and probably a psychic. And this is specifically referencing the moment where George Russell was going long on his hard tires and said, let's wait. Like, I don't want to come in. Tires are still feeling good. Let's wait until there's a virtual safety car or safety car to pit. And then it happened. And that 100% benefited George Russell. Yeah, I just kind of had this moment where I was like, no way, So George Russell, smart and probably a psychic. Great strategy call by George Russell. She says she had 3 words: shirtless and sweaty Carlos.
That is a pretty hot take.
That was a pretty hot take because
in the literal sense,
in the literal sense, and the fact that he is a beautiful man. But I think too, this also gets onto a thing that I love, having the driver cool down rooms back. That is so cool. That is so much fun. Yeah, it was great. Great moment. And
with this driver cool down room specifically with Carlos, Max, and Charles, it was just nice to see their humanity after the race, because we see them as racers on the track, but like this championship fight, I just want to mention, has been so clean and cordial. Like there's a lot of mutual respect between Ferrari and Red Bull, and a lot of mutual respect between the drivers.
Yep.
And that was evident in the cool down room.
Yes.
But yes,
absolutely.
Seeing shirtless Carlos Sainz was a nice treat.
Yep. And the last thing is football helmets are dumb. Yeah. I'm so glad that they ended up giving them the Pirelli ball caps, like the regular baseball caps.
Yes.
Yes. But good Lord, I saw Carlos Sainz come out in a football helmet. I was like, I thought I was in a fever dream. I was like, what am I watching?
Oh God, it looked horrible. It looked so bad.
It looked so tacky. I was just like,
I love the thought behind it though.
I do love the thought
A for effort, F for execution. It looked bad.
Yeah. Not nearly as classy. We were talking about this before we started recording, like the cowboy hats in Austin, the Russian bomber hats, the first time that they went to Sochi, those were great. The football helmets, I just like, again, I know they're trying to play up this whole thing with the Miami Dolphins and Hard Rock Stadium, and it was cool seeing Dan Marino give out the trophy to Max, the winner of the race. But I was just like, what did I watch? There's no way that's real. And I'm glad they all took them off like before they did like the spray. Could you imagine? Just imagine with me for a second what it would look like with the 3 of them spraying champagne in football helmets. That would just be the stupidest thing ever, but also I would pay good money to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Just looked
so silly. So that concludes everything on our podcast this week. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow along, share with your friends, all of that stuff. And we will see you next week with some preliminary, now that we're 5 races in, season updates. And we'll talk about more news and everything that's happening behind the scenes in Formula One next week. And then in 2 weeks, we will be back reviewing the Spanish Grand Prix.
Yes, hopefully a better outcome for us as Scuderia Ferrari fans. But
we'll see what happens.
Yep. That is our episode. Take care, everyone. We will see you next week. Deuces.
Bye.